Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be stepping into the world of Harry Potter.
Yes.
But we're not going to be looking at spells or magical creatures this time.
Right.
We are going to be taking a closer look at the Dursleys.
Interesting.
You know, Harry's dreadful aunt and uncle and cousin.
Yeah.
We've got a stack of articles and fan theories here.
Cool.
And I have to say, some of them are pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So buckle up, because we're about to uncover a whole new side to these infamous characters.
It's interesting, how easily we just dismiss the Dursleys as just being awful people.
Right.
But when we dig a bit deeper,
Yeah.
Their animosity toward magic might actually be a little more complex than we initially thought.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about this whole deep dive is,
Right.
We're looking at the Dursleys not just as like comedic villains,
Yeah.
but as characters with their own, maybe even understandable motivations.
Right.
Have you ever considered that their aversion to magic might be rooted in fear? Oh, absolutely.
Rather than just simple prejudice.
Fear is definitely a key element here.
Okay.
Take Petunia, for example.
Okay.
One of the sources points out that her resentment towards magic might actually stem from her own longing for it.
Really?
She actually tried to go to Hogwarts.
Wow.
Was rejected.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
So it's not just about wanting to be normal. It's about the pain of rejection, of feeling left out while her sister thrived in this world that she desperately wanted to be a part of.
Exactly. And imagine that feeling of inadequacy.
Yeah.
Of constantly, seeing your sibling excel at something that you were denied.
Oh, totally.
That can create some pretty deep-seated insecurities and anxieties.
For sure.
It's like constantly being reminded of what you lack.
Oh, it's like a twisted version of sibling rivalry taken to a magical extreme.
Right.
And how do you think that early rejection might have shaped Petunia's perception of Harry?
Well, it's possible that she saw Harry as a living, breathing reminder.
Of both her sister's magical ability
Yeah.
and her own exclusion from that world.
Right.
It's like this constant reminder of her perceived shortcomings.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of insecurities, let's talk about Vernon.
Okay.
He seems to be obsessed with order and control, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Like one of the articles even suggests that Vernon's bullying of Harry is a way of asserting dominance over something he can't control.
Right.
Magic.
Exactly.
It's almost like he's trying to squash magic out of existence by squashing Harry.
Yeah.
But could it be that under all that bluster, that Vernon's actually terrified of magic?
Fear is a powerful motivator.
For sure.
Remember that scene in the first book where all those owls start delivering Harry's Hogwarts letters?
Oh, yeah.
And Vernon goes absolutely ballistic.
He tries to nail the mail slot shut.
He even nails the mail slot shut.
Yeah.
It's comical, but there's a definite sense of panic in his actions.
It's true. He's like a cartoon character trying to hold back a tidal wave.
Right.
He can't understand it. He can't control it.
Right.
So he lashes out.
It is.
It's a classic fear response, isn't it?
It is. And it's something we can all relate to on some level.
Totally.
Think about a time that you felt completely overwhelmed by something you didn't understand.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it was a new technology or a complex problem or even just like a social situation that made you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Didn't it make you want to retreat or lash out or just try and control the situation in any way you could?
Oh, I've definitely been there.
Right.
It's like that feeling of being totally out of your depth and not knowing how to swim.
Right.
So are we saying that the Dursleys are essentially drowning in their fear of magic?
In a way, yes.
Okay.
They're so terrified of the unknown that they choose to shut it out completely.
Right.
They're trying to build this world where magic doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But the problem is,
Yeah.
reality has a way of intruding.
It always does.
And that's where the conflict arises.
It's like they're living in a house of cards.
Yes.
And Harry is that gust of wind that threatens to blow it all down.
And their instinctive reaction is to try and reinforce those walls,
Right.
to try and make that house even more impenetrable.
It's batten down the hatches.
But as we see throughout the books, that only leads to more tension
Yeah.
and ultimately to their own downfall.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
So if fear is the driving force behind their behavior, does that make them tragic figures in a way?
That's a question worth considering.
Yeah.
On the one hand, their actions are undeniably cruel
Right.
and often bordering on abusive.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they are products of their own limited understanding
Right.
and deep-seated anxieties.
So are we supposed to sympathize with the Dursleys?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But by understanding their motivations, even if we don't condone their behavior,
Yeah.
we gain a more nuanced perspective on their characters.
It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people.
Right. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it does add a layer of complexity to their story.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if things could have been different.
Yeah.
If they had chosen to face their fears instead of letting them control them.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial point that these sources highlight.
Okay.
The importance of understanding and acceptance in combating prejudice.
Okay.
The Dursleys' fear stems from a complete ignorance of the magical world.
Right. They've never been exposed to it.
Right.
They've never even tried to understand it.
Yeah.
So it becomes easy to demonize it.
Right.
They treat magic as this dangerous, unpredictable force that threatens their way of life.
Yeah.
But isn't that often how prejudice works in the real world, too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about historical examples of discrimination against certain groups of people simply because they were different.
Right.
Whether it was based on religion, ethnicity, or even something as superficial as clothing.
These prejudices often stemmed from a lack of knowledge and understanding, leading to fear.
Yeah.
And ultimately to acts of cruelty.
It's a scary thought, isn't it?
It is.
That something as simple as not understanding something can lead to such harmful behavior.
It is. And these articles suggest that the Dursleys, as exaggerated as they are, hold up a mirror to our own potential for prejudice.
That's a good point.
We all have insecurities, things we don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's easy to let those fears dictate our actions.
So what can we learn from the Dursleys' mistakes?
Right.
How can we avoid falling into that same trap of fear and prejudice?
That's a question we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But for now, I think it's important to just acknowledge that even seemingly normal people like the Dursleys can harbor deep-seated prejudices.
Yeah.
And that's a sobering thought.
It is. It makes you wonder about those everyday interactions.
Right.
Where we might be making judgments based on fear or a lack of understanding without even realizing it.
Right.
But we'll delve into all that after a quick message, so stay tuned.
Sounds good.
So before the break, we were talking about how the Dursleys' fear of magic, could be a reflection of our own potential for prejudice.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
This parallel.
Yeah.
It
really is.
The Dursleys, in their, desperate attempt to cling to normalcy, end up kind of embodying the very thing that they fear the most difference.
And that makes me think about, how often we as humans tend to fear what we don't understand.
Right.
Whether it's, a different culture, new technology, or even just somebody with different opinions.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel threatened by, the unfamiliar.
One of the articles points out that this fear often stems from a lack of exposure and empathy.
Okay.
The Dursleys, for example, never made any attempt to learn about the magical world.
Right. They just shut it out.
They chose to remain ignorant.
Yeah.
And that ignorance fueled their prejudice.
But wouldn't it have been easier for them to just accept magic as, a part of their lives?
Well,
especially considering Harry's living there.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But I think that's where their obsession with appearances comes in.
Right.
They were so focused on, maintaining this facade of normalcy that they were willing to deny reality itself.
It's like they were trapped in this prison of their own making.
Right.
And the more they try to control the situation, the more chaotic it became.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the Dursleys' story.
Okay.
Trying to suppress or deny our fears rather than confronting them can ultimately make them stronger.
So how do we break free from that cycle?
Right.
These sources seem to suggest that understanding and acceptance are key.
Absolutely. Remember how Petunia's resentment stemmed from feeling excluded from the magical world? One way to combat that feeling is through inclusion, through making a genuine effort to understand and empathize with those who are different from us.
So instead of building walls, we should be building bridges.
Precisely.
It's about stepping outside of our comfort zones and being open to new experiences and new perspectives.
And it requires a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay.
And biases.
Right.
We all have these preconceived notions about the world.
For sure.
But it's important to question those notions.
Yeah.
And to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
It's interesting, though, because even though the Dursleys are supposed to represent the normal world,
right,
in contrast to Harry's magical one,
Right.
they end up being the ones who seem truly out of touch.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Shutting themselves off from anything outside their narrow worldview.
Right.
They become trapped in this cycle of fear and ignorance.
Yeah.
They miss out on the wonder and the beauty that exists beyond their own limited understanding.
It's like they're living in black and white while Harry's world is bursting with color.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of Harry,
Yeah.
do the sources offer any insights into how his presence might have challenged the Dursleys' worldview? Did they ever show any signs of change?
That's a tricky question.
Okay.
While the source material doesn't explicitly state that the Dursleys underwent like a complete transformation,
Right.
there are subtle hints that their interactions with Harry did have some impact on them.
Okay.
Remember that scene in the 7th book, just before Harry leaves Privet Drive for the last time?
Oh, yeah.
When they're all packing up the car?
Yeah.
And Dudley suddenly shakes Harry's hand.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's a small gesture, but it speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Dudley, who had spent years tormenting Harry,
Right.
finally acknowledges him as a human being.
Yeah.
Even expresses gratitude for saving his life from the Dementors.
Wow, I'd forgot about that. It's almost like a crack in Dudley's tough exterior.
Right.
A glimmer of empathy kind of breaking through. But what about Vernon and Petunia? Did they ever soften toward Harry?
There's a moment,
Uh,
a very subtle one,
okay.
where Vernon almost says something to Harry. He seems to be on the verge of expressing regret,
Okay.
or perhaps even acknowledging Harry's bravery.
Yeah.
But he stops himself,
Oh, wow.
unable to fully break free from his own rigid worldview.
So he's caught between his fear of magic and a newfound respect for Harry,
Right.
who he sees defying that very fear.
Exactly.
It's almost tragic, like he's so close to a breakthrough but can't quite get there.
Right.
Does that moment hold any significance?
I think it does.
Okay.
It suggests that even the most hardened hearts can be touched by compassion and understanding.
Okay.
It might not always be a dramatic transformation,
Right.
but even the smallest shift in perspective can have a ripple effect.
So maybe there's hope for the Dursleys after all. Or at least a glimmer of hope that they might one day come to terms with their own fears and prejudices.
It's certainly possible, and it reminds us that change is always possible.
Yeah.
Even for those who seem most resistant to it.
That's true.
But the real takeaway here is that the potential for growth and understanding exists within all of us.
I like that it's a reminder that we shouldn't give up on people, even those who seem set in their ways.
Right.
But how do we apply these lessons to our own lives?
Right.
I mean, we might not have to deal with magic.
Yeah.
But we all encounter people who are different from us.
Right.
People who challenge our comfort zones.
You're absolutely right, and that's where the real work begins.
Okay.
It's about recognizing those moments when our fears and our prejudices might be influencing our interactions with others.
It's about choosing empathy over judgment.
Exactly.
Curiosity over fear.
Right.
And it's about recognizing that our differences are what make us interesting, what make life vibrant and full of surprises.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most powerful messages we can take away from the Harry Potter series as a whole.
Yeah.
It's a story about the triumph of love and understanding over fear and hatred.
Right.
And it reminds us that even in a world filled with magic and wonder, the most important battles are often fought within ourselves.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
But we're not quite done with the Dursleys yet.
No.
We've talked about their fear and their prejudice.
Right.
But what about the other side of the coin?
Yeah.
What about Harry?
Right.
How does his experience with the Dursleys shape his own worldview?
That's a great question, and one we'll dive into right after this short break.
Stay with us. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle this last part of our Dursley deep dive.
Okay.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
We've explored their motivations, their flaws, the impact they had on Harry's character. And I think we've come to a deeper understanding not only of these characters, but of ourselves. Absolutely.
We've seen how fear and prejudice can really shape our actions.
Right.
But we've also seen the power of love and empathy to overcome those negative forces.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful message to leave our listeners with.
I agree.
Before the break, we were talking about how, even characters like the Dursleys, as unlikable as they seem, they can teach us some valuable lessons about ourselves.
Absolutely.
But what about Harry?
Right.
He's the one who actually lived with them.
Yeah.
How did their treatment of him shape his own worldview?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
Because Harry's experience with the Dursleys really forms the foundation of his character.
Okay.
It's like this crucible where his values are forged.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So how exactly did growing up with the Dursleys shape Harry?
Well, one of the sources argues that despite the Dursleys' attempts to squash any hint of magic out of him,
Right.
Harry never loses his inherent kindness and capacity for love. That's true. He always seems to see the good in people,
Right.
even when they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
Like with Hagrid, for instance. He instantly trusts him.
Yeah.
Even though Hagrid is, this giant, intimidating figure.
Exactly. And I think that speaks volumes about Harry's character.
Yeah.
He doesn't judge people based on appearances.
Right.
Or their differences.
Yeah.
He looks for the heart, the soul.
Yeah.
And where do you think he learned that?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
He learned that from the Dursleys by experiencing their narrow-mindedness.
Right.
He developed a completely opposite outlook.
Precisely.
Wow.
It's like a photographic negative.
Yeah.
The Dursleys represent everything that Harry rejects.
Right.
Their obsession with appearances, their fear of anything different, their lack of empathy.
Yeah.
Harry stands in direct opposition to all of that.
So in a way, the Dursleys, by being so awful, inadvertently shaped Harry into the kind, compassionate person he becomes. Right.
That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is, and it highlights this fact that even negative experiences can have a positive impact on our development.
Okay.
They can teach us resilience, empathy, and the importance of standing up for what we believe in.
So the Dursleys, without meaning to, gave Harry the tools he needed to fight against everything they represent.
Exactly.
But it wasn't just about resilience, was it?
Right.
Harry also learned to value friendship and
Well,
loyalty.
absolutely.
Think about his relationships with Ron and Hermione.
Right. Having been deprived of love and affection at Privet Drive, Harry cherishes the genuine connections that he makes at Hogwarts.
He's fiercely loyal to his friends.
Yeah.
Like he's willing to risk his life for them time and time again. It's like he understands the true meaning of love and friendship in a way that the Dursleys never could.
One of the sources even suggests that Harry's ability to love and connect with others
is his greatest strength.
Oh, yeah.
Most powerful magic.
Interesting.
It's what allows him to defeat Voldemort in the end.
So it's not just about spells and potions.
No.
It's about the power of love.
Yes.
To overcome even the darkest of forces.
Right.
And that's a message that resonates far beyond the world of Harry Potter.
Absolutely. It's a message that's relevant to all of us.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether we believe in magic or not.
Totally.
It's a reminder that our connections with others, our ability to empathize and love, are what make us human.
Right.
And that those connections can be a source of incredible strength.
And that makes me think about how we as individuals can choose to be more like Harry in our own lives. We can choose to see the good in people, to value our friendships, and to fight for what we believe in.
Even when it's difficult.
Exactly. We can choose to embrace difference, to challenge our own prejudices, and to build a world where love and understanding triumph over fear and hatred.
I think that's a great point.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive on the Dursleys.
It does.
They might not be the most beloved characters, but I think we can all agree that they offer some really valuable insights into human nature and the power of choice.
Absolutely.
We can choose to let fear and prejudice control us.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to embrace love, understanding, and compassion.
Right.
The choice is always ours.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
Of course.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.
Yes.
And keep believing in the magic of human connection.